Hey, it's Alan, and I just wanted to let you know that you can now listen to The Ongoing History of New Music early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Hey, it's Alan again, and since you like listening to The Ongoing History of New Music, I thought you might be interested in checking out a new podcast from Curious Cast and Global News called Russia Rising. This is hosted by Jeff Semple. He's the European Bureau Chief for Global News. This is fascinating. Jeff has spent countless hours on the ground in Russia, gathering interviews, talking with Russian trolls and hackers and Putin supporters and even ex-KGB agents. In this series, Jeff hopes to unravel this giant mystery behind Putin's Russia and to try to figure out how it's gone from being this tenuous ally to this potential global threat. Here's a sneak peek from episode 2 of the series. And while you're listening, search and subscribe to Russia Rising for free at curiouscast.ca or wherever you happen to be enjoying this podcast. Trust me, you'll love this.
So I've been working as a Canadian journalist based in Europe for about 5.5 years. And during that time, I've seen Vladimir Putin in person a couple of times. The first was in Sochi, Russia. I was there reporting on the Olympic Games back in 2014. And while I was there, I stopped into Canada Olympic House. It's basically a hangout for Canadian athletes, their families, friends, and fans. And there's suddenly about a dozen Russian police officers guarding the doors. People start screaming. Everyone has their cell phone cameras in the air, and I look over, and there, about 20 meters away, is the Russian president, Vladimir Putin. Now, the first thing that goes through my mind is, man, he's a lot shorter than he looks on TV. But of course, he has this giant, larger-than-life presence. He's smiling, he's holding a pair of Team Canada Olympic mittens, and he and his translator grab a microphone.
Давайте пожелаем встречи нашим сборным в финале.
Let us wish our teams to meet in the final, in the hockey final.
Now, it's kind of hard to hear over the cheers, but that was Putin through his translator, saying he hopes that Canada and Russia meet in the men's hockey final, a rematch of that epic Canada-USSR summit series back in 1972. That marked the first time that NHL players had ever skated against the Soviets, at a time when Soviet Russia was at the height of its power. Putin tells the crowd that he wants a rematch with Canada, except this time with Russia as the victor.
Thank you.
His surprise visit to Canada Olympic House receives a rock star reception. The 100 or so Canadians in the crowd are going crazy. And his prediction about the men's hockey proved half true. Canada did advance to the finals and won gold, though it would be against Sweden, not Russia. And just days after those Sochi Olympics finished on a high note, that smiling, hockey-loving President Putin invaded Ukraine.
Ukrainian officials say at least 16 civilians have been killed in the past 24 hours in renewed fighting in the east of the country.
That invasion and the subsequent annexation of Crimea spiraled into a war that has killed 10,000 people by some counts and is still going on right now. And it also reignited a diplomatic war between Russia and the West.
Canada has been unequivocal in our condemnation of Vladimir Putin and Russia.
But through all of that, the Russian president appears utterly unfazed. Vladimir Putin has ruled over the world's largest country for nearly 2 decades, but for many, he remains a mystery. One this podcast hopes to unravel with help from those who know him best, including a former fellow Russian secret agent.
I believe I have more or less have an idea how he's thinking as an ex-KGB officer.
I'm Jeff Semple, the Europe Bureau Chief for Global News, and this is Russia Rising. On this episode, we'll explore how a poor kid from a tough neighborhood became a secret agent, one of the world's wealthiest men, and Russia's longest-serving leader since Stalin. while also being accused of a laundry list of atrocities.
The government has concluded that it is highly likely that Russia was responsible for the act against Sergei and Yulia Skripal.
What we need to do is understand Vladimir Putin for what he is, a murderer and a thug.
But to truly understand what motivates Putin, why he does what he does, we need to know where he came from.
Hello?
Hi, Arkady. It's Jeff Semple calling from Global News.
Hi, Jeff. Hi.
I reached out to Arkady Ostrovsky, the Russian editor for The Economist magazine. Ostrovsky was born in Moscow, has spent much of his career in Russia, and he literally wrote the book on Putin's early years, a biography called The Invention of Russia. A lot of details from Putin's childhood come from the man himself. Putin has described growing up in a tough neighborhood in what was then Leningrad. His father was a foreman at a local factory, and they lived in a rat-infested communal housing block where several families shared a single apartment. As a kid, Putin was small for his age and was always getting into fights with kids who were bigger and stronger.
But I think just growing up in the pretty tough the streets of Leningrad, in a quite a thuggish atmosphere, I think there was a lot of things he learned from the street fights which he was engaged in. He did judo. He wanted to be, physically stand up to the kids who were picking at him.
Еще 50 лет назад Ленинградская улица меня научила одному правилу.
In a recent TV interview, Putin said the Leningrad street taught him an important lesson. If a fight is inevitable, you need to throw the first punch.
Террористических ударов в России, она от наших действий в Сирии, уверяю вас, не стало ни больше, ни меньше.
Like most kids, Putin wasn't too concerned with global affairs, and he certainly never dreamed of being a politician or becoming president. Instead, he wanted to be a sailor or maybe a pilot. But one day, as a teenager, he says he saw a movie that would change his life. The 1968 film The Shield and the Sword depicted the story of a fictional Russian spy named Alexander Belov. The guy seemed invincible. In the movie, he infiltrated Nazi Germany and obtained vital intelligence. Belov was the Soviet Union's answer to a certain fictional British super spy. Like 007, Belov had nerves of steel and was skilled at manipulating other people. He also spoke fluent German, and so too did a young Vladimir Putin. In an interview decades later, Putin recalled becoming obsessed with the film, explaining that what amazed him most was how one spy could decide the fate of thousands of people. After graduating university with a law degree in 1975, Putin signed up to the Soviet Secret Service, the KGB.
I think most people have created a sort of cartoon image of Putin.
That's Stephen Lee Myers, another Putin biographer and veteran journalist with the New York Times. He says Putin may have been inspired by a super spy, but he himself was not one.
Because a lot of people think of Vladimir Putin as, a former spy, a KGB agent and all that. In fact, he was never a spy. He was an officer in the KGB. He served a not illustrious career, to be honest, in the KGB. He didn't rise very fast. He seems to have had some problems. He didn't really. He learned German as a young man, and for that reason, if he were successful or had a great career in the KGB, he would have gone abroad and served undercover somewhere in the West. But in fact, he went to East Germany, which was an ally of the Soviet Union, of course, and served in Dresden, not even in Berlin. So it was seen as a kind of a mundane career and even a mundane job that he had.
But that mundane desk job suddenly got a lot more interesting in 1989. After the Berlin Wall came down in November, The protests spilled into East Germany, and they landed right on Putin's doorstep.
And one night in December of 1989, he was at the little villa in Dresden where he worked, which is around the corner from very notorious prison headquarters of the East German secret police, the Stasi. And the protests in Dresden, as they were elsewhere in East Germany, had continued against the government at the time. And a very large crowd had gathered outside the Stasi headquarters. And, it was for the East Germans inside, I'm sure, a terrifying moment.
In a recent TV interview, Putin himself described peering through the window at the crowds gathering outside his KGB office. The guard who was posted at the entrance took off, and Putin fired up the furnace and started burning secret Soviet documents.
Obviously, we couldn't just lay our secret intelligence documents and details in the street. We couldn't turn the information over to anyone. So we had to demonstrate our willingness to act.
Putin was a junior officer, but his boss was away, so he picked up the phone and called for backup.
He had called, what was then the Soviet army that was in East Germany, asking for help or protection against what he considered to be a mob. And, the reply he got was that there was nothing they could do because they had no orders from Moscow. Moscow is silent, he was told.
Moscow is silent. So Putin stepped outside to confront the crowd alone.
And he eventually came out and told everybody that was outside that it was a diplomatic compound and that it was protected, and that if anybody tried to come in, he would tell the guards to open fire. And that sort of took the wind out of the sails of the crowd a bit, and they went back to what was then a celebration. That moment seemed to really represent to him the collapse of central government authority, the authority of the nation. And that's something that he often repeats over and over. It can never happen, because if that happens in Russia, there will be chaos.
The Soviet Union dissolved into 15 new countries, including the new Russian Federation, which had just lost 2 million square miles of territory. Putin watched it crumble before his eyes.
In his mind, Russia was falling apart in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The other republics of the Soviet Union left and became independent nations, Belarus, the Baltic states, the Central Asian nations. But Russia, he was going to hold together. And he really believes that democracy, or the will of the people, or the mob rule, as he sees it, is a dangerous thing. That if you leave that unchecked, it will tear a country apart. That's how he views it.
I'm Jeff Semple. Thanks for listening to this sneak peek from episode 2 of Russia Rising. If you liked what you heard, you can subscribe for free now at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.